Right, good afternoon, Year 8. I'm going to be taking over from Miss Tweedy, and I'm going to be teaching you Mondays, I think Wednesdays and Thursdays. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the topics sort of one by one. So we're going to start with microbes and disease, and considering our current predicament, this seems rather fitting. So the first thing that I would like to do is get your books, and I'd like to write down the title, which is "What is a microbe?" And for your first task, I want you to think about this. Have a look at this. Write down all the diseases you can think of, and then next to them, what causes them. Okay, so just pause the tape now and write down the title, and then all the diseases you can think of and what causes them. Off you go. Okay, you're right. So here are a few. Now, obviously, COVID-19 is the one that's in the news at the moment and affecting our lives. COVID-19, corona, is a virus. That disease is caused by a virus. Cancer. Now, cancer is a bit of a strange one. Cancer is actually our own body cells multiplying out of control and turning against us. So that actually isn't caused by a microbe. Neither generally is arthritis. Arthritis is once again a destruction of part of the joints that basically keep our bones nice and smooth. It's basically the collagen between our bones is really, really nice and smooth. It's like an oil slick. And when that wears away, we get arthritis. So neither of these two can be caught like some of the others can. So tuberculosis, that is caused by a bacteria. Malaria, that is actually a parasite. It's transported in mosquitoes, but a parasite is actually transmitted to us when we get bitten by mosquitoes. So mosquitoes don't actually cause malaria, but they do transmit it. Okay, the parasite that causes it. Athlete's foot is caused by a fungal infection, a fungus. Influenza is a little bit like COVID-19 in that it's a virus, same as with a cold. So colds, flus, corona, they're all viruses. Pneumonia is usually caused by a bacteria, although usually what will happen is our body will have to be weakened before we get that. Cholera is a bacterial infection which leads to very, very bad diarrhea. Food poisoning, usually caused by either Salmonella or E. coli, and those are types of bacteria. And chickenpox, that is caused by virus. So we've got all some of these diseases. Some of them we can catch, what we call communicable diseases, and others we just suffer from. They're non-communicable. So what I'd like to do is very quickly, if you didn't get these examples, write them down and write down what causes them. So for example, COVID-19, that is a virus. Cancer, sort of own cells. Sorry, move this along. You get the idea. Okay, so just pause the tape now, please. Just write down very quickly what causes them. Okay, so the main part of today's lesson, all of you should be able to define the term microbe and be able to state 4 types of microbe, although we're only going to concentrate on 3, and be able to say what a pathogen is. Most of you will be able to define and know the difference between a communicable and a non-communicable disease. We just touched on that just now, so hopefully you get an idea for that. And if most or some of you should be able to define disease and be able to explain whether it's communicable or non-communicable. That means it can be transmitted. So, firstly, what actually is a microbe? So, a microbe or microscopic organism is a living thing that is too small to be seen with the naked eye. So you need a microscope to see it. We need, the term is very general and is used to describe many different types of life forms with dramatically different sizes and characteristics. So the 3 main examples we're going to look at today are bacteria, fungi, and viruses. So what you need to do is prepare a page, and I'm going to draw out for you the basic features of each one, and I'm going to ask you to do this along with me as we go. Okay, so if you need to pause the tape and just get that ready, you can do that. So let's just say we've got a typical animal cell here. Just quickly move that in. So this is like a typical cell in your body. You've got the cell membrane, you've got the nucleus there in the middle, and you've got cytoplasm. And you've got a few other little bits and pieces floating around, like you would have things like mitochondria, which you'll learn about as you get a bit older. Okay, so this would be, say, a typical human cell. Okay, this might be a muscle cell or a skin cell or a cheek cell. We've got other kinds of cells. We've got very small cells inside our body. This would be an example of, say, a red blood cell. And a red blood cell, as the name suggests, is red. It looks a bit like that, has a little indentation in the middle. Okay, and these are probably the smallest cells in our body. So red blood cells are maybe about that big compared to a typical cell, which is about that big. A bacteria is about that big. Okay, so we have 320 trillion cells inside our body. And you can see bacteria, they are way, way smaller. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to zoom in on that. And the first thing we're going to do is a bacteria. So imagine that we're going to zoom right in on him. Okay, and do that. So if we do, a bacteria looks a bit like this. Okay. So firstly, it does have a cell membrane. Okay, so you're going to need to label that. So this outer layer is a cell membrane, and it's made of much the same material as our cell membrane is. Okay, so the cell membrane is that part just there. Okay, right. So the cell membrane is that part there. Now, bacteria cells don't actually have a nucleus. Okay, so we have our DNA contained within the nucleus, but bacteria, they have their DNA kind of just floating around inside their sort of bodies like that. Okay, so that is the bacteria's DNA, what we chromosomes. Now, we also have chromosomes. Our DNA is arranged as chromosomes, but theirs are just floating free. So let's just add that in and just add that in. There it is. So you can start to label that up as well, chromosomes, and if you want, you can just put DNA. Okay, right. So that's the main part, and then bacteria also have what we have, this soft jelly-like material, which hopefully you remember from year 7, is called cytoplasm. Okay, so we're just going to add that in as well. So as you can see already, a bacteria has a lot of same things which are very, very similar to us. Okay, they've got DNA, just like us, except ours is in a nucleus and theirs is just floating free. They've got a cell membrane, just like us, and they've got cytoplasm. But there are some key differences. Okay, so I'm going to go through those now. Firstly, some bacteria have an extra protective layer. So I'm going to draw that in there. Okay, there it is. They have an extra protective layer, called a cell wall. Okay, you might be familiar, plants have cell walls, except these ones are usually made of different things, different material to plants, but we'll add that in. Okay, so you can add that in, cell wall. And some bacteria have yet an extra layer beyond that, which they need for extra protection, okay, which is essentially a layer of slime. So I'm going to do that in nice bright green so you can sort of see it. Okay, so what they call their slime capsule. Now I'm just going to have to make that a little bit bigger so it's pointing at the right thing. There it is. Right, and then yeah, this is extra outer layer called the slime capsule. Great name. And that's basically for protection. That protects bacteria from some of the things they come across in their environment. Right, now there are a couple of extra little things that bacteria have. They have, as well as their DNA, in a chromosome just floating free, they also have these little rings of circular DNA called plasmids, and they just sort of float around free inside the cytoplasm, just like this. Okay, bacteria exchange these with each other as a way of sort of partially reproducing. Okay, so those are called plasmids, and again, there it is. We'll just label that up for you. Plasmid, there it is. Okay, and then sometimes bacteria need to be able to move, and they can do this in one of two ways. Sometimes they have like a little tail, which they whip, a bit like a sperm does, and that's called a flagella. Again, great name. Flagella. Or sometimes what they do is they have little hairs on their outer layer which they can sort of waft their way along, sort of like a wave-like movement, and those are called cilia. Now, some bacteria have both, some bacteria have none, and some bacteria have one. It just sort of depends what type of bacteria it is. Okay, so let's just label those up. Those are cilia. Sorry, this diagram's getting a little confused. Cilia. Just going to get rid of these. Don't need those lines anymore. I think you know what you're looking at. Okay, so there is a typical example of a bacteria. So let's very quickly go through this. So firstly, it has a chromosome, its DNA, its genetic instructions, just like us, except they're not in a nucleus, they're just floating free. You also have plasmid, which are little bits of DNA. They're just little circular bits of DNA, they're just floating in the cytoplasm. You've obviously got cytoplasm as well. You've got a cell membrane. Sometimes you've got a cell wall. And sometimes you also have a slime capsule's third outer layer to protect it. Okay. You have cilia or flagella for movement. Okay, so what do the parts do? Well, like I said, the same thing. Your DNA, so your plasmid and your chromosomes, those are the instructions. Your cytoplasm, just like in our cells, is where the chemical reactions happen to keep it alive. Cilia and flagella are for movement. Slime capsule is for protection. And I think that's, oh yeah, cell membrane allows substances in and out of the cell. So what I'd like to do now is very quickly pause the tape, copy up the picture of the bacteria, and with each part, just leave a little bit of space to say what it does. Okay, so do that now, please. Okay, so now going down a level, if that is the size of a bacteria compared to a red blood cell, and then say to a normal cell like a cheek or skin cell or whatever, viruses are even smaller still. So say, for example, we're zoomed in on our bacteria. A virus, typical virus, would be about that big compared to a bacteria. So bacteria is that big compared to a cell. So you get an idea. Viruses are absolutely tiny. Now, there's a couple of really important things here I just want to mention. Bacteria, they do all the things that 100% make them alive. They are definitely alive. Okay, they do respiration, they reproduce, they excrete waste, they do all the things. Viruses are a little bit different. There's a lot of debate about whether or not they are alive because they don't do all of the things that living things do, but they do have structure. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in on a virus. So imagine a virus that's about that big compared to bacteria. So firstly, viruses come in many shapes or forms. We're going to do a fairly straightforward one. Okay, so a typical virus often has like a bit of a geometric shape like this. So you can start by drawing this. Okay, so this is a typical virus. There we go. Okay. That's one kind of virus. I'll do another one as well, just for an example. Probably one that you're a bit more familiar with. One that looks a bit like this. Okay, so you can draw these and we'll label them up together. Okay, so if you can just quickly draw these, this is what a couple of examples of like typical viruses look like. Okay, but they are much, much simpler. Okay, so let's just say what they have is this. They have their genetic material, essentially just their DNA. Again, DNA. Okay, and that is found there. See an arrow for that. Genetic material is there. So it's a bit like the chromosomes in the bacteria and the chromosomes in us, okay? And then, other than that, all they have is a protective layer, a protein coat. That's it. Okay, so a protein coat. And these take on slightly different shapes. So in here, this is it. Protected layer there and there. Now, some bacteria have these little spikes on their surface. An example of this is coronavirus. And what it does is it helps it lock onto certain cells. So what will happen is when, for example, a virus lands on a cell, what it will do, it will come into a cell. So I'm just going to draw the surface of a cell here. So imagine there's the surface of a cell. There's the cell membrane, so let's just label that. So imagine we're zoomed in on cell's membrane here, like this, okay? So a virus comes, a little dot of a virus comes in and goes and lands on a cell membrane like that. What it then does, it's got a really sneaky trick. It'll put its DNA into our cells. And then what happens is our cells are tricked into replicating that DNA and making more viruses. And then those viruses burst out of the cell, killing the cell, and that's how they make us sick. Okay, so that is how viruses work. Okay, so what you need to do is very quickly pause the tape again, copy this up, and just very quickly. Okay, so last but not least are funguses. So we've got a typical human cell here, and we've got a red blood cell, we've got a bacteria. Fungals or fungus infections, funguses are cells as well, and they're living. So they're actually quite big. Usually they're often the same size as our cells. Sometimes they can be a bit smaller, but sometimes they can be the same size. So they have a lot of the same things. They have a nucleus for their DNA. They have things going on inside their cells, like they have mitochondria, which carry out respiration. They have cytoplasm. Okay, the only real difference that they have is they have a cell membrane, but outside their cell membrane, they have something else. They have a cell wall. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, plants also have cell walls as well, but these cell walls are made from something completely different, because plants make their cell walls from the sugars that they make during photosynthesis, but this cell wall is made from a material that the plants make. So let's just label all these parts up now. So firstly, we've got a cell membrane, and that does the same thing. It lets things in and out of the cell. There we go. We've got cytoplasm. That's where chemical reactions happen. We've got a nucleus for DNA. That's where the chromosomes are. And then we've got a cell wall. And it's made of a material called chitin. Okay. And that's quite important. So I'm just going to make sure that's all in there for you. There it is. Right. And funguses can cause infections like athlete's foot, things like that, often those nasty skin irritations. So those are the three main kinds of pathogens. So you need to make sure that you've copied and drawn all of these up. So I'm just going to pause the tape now, and you need to do that. Okay, so very quick comparison, but obviously slightly different from mine. What you've got here is there's a red blood cell, can't even fit the whole thing in the picture. There's a typical bacteria, so you can see much smaller than our cells. And then viruses, here, 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 even smaller still. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some idea of scale. Right, what I want you to do now is go into assignments, and in assignments there is some information on bacteria, funguses, and viruses. Now you can download and print the sheets off and keep them and stick them in your book, or you can just have them on your screen and use them. And then there is also a sheet that I would like to fill in. So what you need to do is read the information about bacteria, viruses, and fungus, and then fill in each section of the sheet on each one. So I'm just going to pause the tape and show you what I mean. So this is the sheet that is in the file section, and it's also in assignment. So what you do, type of microbes, you'd write, for example, bacteria, and then you explain a little bit about what the bacteria are. Okay, now there's several things you can do here. You can take the information that we've covered in class, although you probably need a bit more. So I would 100% suggest you go online. What are they? Well, we know they're living organisms. They're single-celled living organisms. We know that, but we need to know more. So you're going to need to do some research online. What are they? Okay. Where are they found? Okay. So again, you could just put that question into Google, see what comes up. Try and use multiple sources. Okay. Don't just use one website. Try and use several. Try and get a decent answer. What do they look like? You could do a very quick description. You can add an extra drawing, although you should have your drawing by now. And then find some examples of bacteria. Now, I gave you some at the very beginning of the lesson, but there are so many different examples of bacteria. Try and find a few different ones. Then you need to do the same for a virus, and then the same thing for a fungus, or fungi for singular. Okay, and what I would like you to do is go online, spend about 10 minutes researching each one, and then fill in this sheet, and then you can upload that to me through assignments. Okay, so I'll be online to answer your questions if any of you get stuck. But if you take 10 minutes on each one, bacteria, virus, fungi, doing the research, and then say another 5 minutes to just fill in the section. So each one will take you about 15 minutes to fill out. That should bring us up nicely to the end of the lesson. Okay, if you have any questions, I'll be on Teams, and good luck.